So having done this reading of their manifesto and breakdown, I do understand better why the SNP have been pushing for independence, because it does seem like there are a lot of issues that they cannot address because they don't have enough power over their own government. It may not be the best political tactic to keep banging on about it. People get tired of it and frustrated with it, especially as they may have enough support now to win a referendum. It's still not an overwhelming amount of support for independence, and it is also, I think, quite an easy cop-out for the SNP. This independence issue, if any of their plans fail and their policies don't work out, it's quite easy for them just to blame Westminster, to blame the fact that they don't have these powers, they don't have the resources and the finances that they should do and that they would do if they were independent. It is definitely quite an easy excuse for them to fall back upon. I think within the UK, the SNP policies are actually considered quite radical, quite extreme. They have said a lot of similar things to the Green Party. They're not as extreme as the Green Party, but they're certainly more extreme than the mainstream parties in the UK. Having said this, comparing them to their Northern European neighbours, I'd actually say their policies are pretty typical. They would be quite well at home in a country like Denmark or Iceland or Sweden and so on. Even Germany to a large extent. Their policies are not that crazy. It's just that by our more traditional conservative standards in the UK, which I think we have, even the Labour Party are very conservative. They are considered quite radical, quite extreme. In general, they push for redistribution of wealth, which is classic left-wing policy right there, trying to increase access to education, to welfare, to healthcare, protecting workers' rights, and the green side pushing climate action. Like I said, not as radical as the Greens, but certainly more left-wing than Labour, that's for sure. And this is strongly represented in their manifesto, I think, and the fact that both the Greens and the Scottish National Party are both fighting for independence. Now, where the Greens in Scotland, where they would be fighting for more radical green climate policies within Holyrood in the Scottish Parliament, just like that's what they do with their 7 MSPs out of 129. That's what the SNP do in Westminster, except not for green policy, but for Scottish independence in general. That's what they spend a lot of their time doing, and I would say probably at least 60-70%, perhaps more, of all of their pledges in their manifesto revolved around gaining more money and gaining more devolved power from Westminster, as well as bigging up their own decisions that they've made that have only been possible because of their devolved power, the policies they already have in place because of their devolved power. So they are highly focused on independence as a kind of foundation stone, a foundation principle that all of the other policies grow out of, which I do think in many ways is actually a way for them to rest on their laurels and not have to push their own original policies or actionable promises as much as they really could do. Their manifesto was pretty small, pretty short compared to the other ones, and I feel like they could do a lot more to flesh out their policies that they would act upon if they were in government, the things that they would do. There weren't too many numbers in their manifesto. It really felt like that they could have done more to to shore up their manifesto and give us more promises that would result in action rather than promises to ask other people to do stuff for them. But at least they wrote one. I mean, the Scottish Green Party is actually relying on on their 2021 manifesto. I haven't read the Conservative and Labour manifestos. I do think it's a bit suspicious that they are about 4 pages shorter than their English counterparts. Something like 140, 150 pages for Labour, 75 for the Conservatives. Both of them are just a bit shorter, and it does make me wonder how copy and paste happy the Scottish versions of their English parties were. And it makes sense as well, you know, a lot of the time a Scottish party, if it's attached to an English party, their role is to support and to bolster the English party so that they can rule Scotland through Westminster. Because in a way it gives them more power, because then their party is ruling through Westminster, whereas the SNP will never have that opportunity. The only powers the SNP will ever have come from Holyrood and are limited by the powers of the Scottish government, whereas the Conservative, the Labour, the Lib Dem parties, if they were to gain power, technically, although they do not always agree, but technically they would be using the force of Westminster as well as the government of Holyrood. But this is just part of the mess of a semi-independent, devolved country, province that we have in Britain. So I was quite concerned about the lack of information about Scottish politics that was available. I think that the state of party policies and the complexity of their electoral systems are pretty tough. I can kind of see why nobody's done videos on them, but at the same time I think it shows a real need to do this, which is something perhaps I can push into as I continue making videos. For example, I've figured out how the MSP electoral system works. It's a bit complicated. It's a mix of first past the post, as in England, but it's a mix of that and an additional members system, which uses a mathematical formula to work out who becomes one of 7 regional MPs in the, I think, 8 regions around Scotland. So there are 2 methods for voting MSPs into Holyrood, and one of them is direct first past the post, and the other uses the system based on how popular they are, which does go some way to mitigate the unfairness and the inequality in the first past the post system, which can allow parties to gain millions and millions of votes and still get 0 or 1 politician, whereas another party gets 4 or 5 times more votes than them and gets 50 times more politicians or 300 times more politicians. I mean, when you're talking the Greens, for example, perhaps some of them most hard done by, or UKIP as well. I think UKIP got about 5 million votes. The Greens regularly get between 3 and 4 million votes in England or around the UK, I think. They've only ever had 1 MP apiece. The Greens regularly have 1. The UKIP's had 1. I think maybe 2 at some point, but 1 elected. And even that was in a by-election rather than a full election. So considering they have between 3 and 5 million voters and they get 1 politician, and then you've got the Labour and Conservatives who range between, say, 15 to 20 million. I don't think it ever really goes above 20 million people vote for one of these parties. It's crazy that they get 300 plus politicians. If Labour win the landslide, they're likely to get around 20, maybe pushing 22, 24 million votes. They're going to have 400 plus MPs. you know, with alternatives coming, if Reform, for example, get a lot of votes, let's say they get a similar amount as UKIP, 5 million, are they going to get one politician? Maybe. Even if they get 10, it's still drastically unequal and unfair. So this additional member system allows someone like the Greens, for example, to have 7 MSPs in Holyrood, which is much more representative of the level of support that they have across the country. The number of people that actually like that party and want to vote for them, they are allowed to be represented in this second round of voting that uses this algorithm. Otherwise, you know, it would be stuck with first past the post, and they wouldn't have any politicians. So yeah, so although I've worked out how the MSP situation works, I haven't worked out how the MP situation works. That is beyond me. I've asked Claude, I've Googled it, I've looked at videos, I've done a lot. I've now downloaded a 72-page academic article on the Scottish electoral system, which I'm hoping will clear this up, but it seems like nobody, I haven't found any source that can tell me exactly how MPs, so that's members of Westminster Parliament that represent Scotland, they are not the same as MSPs. MSPs only act in the Scottish Parliament at Holyrood. MPs are from Scotland, but they vote in Westminster Parliament. They are not the same people, although there have been occasions where they've overlapped. There are something like 56 MPs in Scotland, which last year, I think, last election, I think there turned out to be 17 that overlapped, and I think then some of them had to stand down from one or the other seat. But it just doesn't add up. It's not like one part of the MSPs automatically become MPs. There is a different way of dividing Scotland, and a different electoral system, which I will find out more tomorrow when I go to the polling station and spoil my ballots. So anyway, I know this has dragged on a lot, but thank you for staying if you have, and hopefully I'll see you in my next video. Take care.